All right, good morning, everybody. Good to have you. Thank you so much for attending our webinar for this month. Today, we're going to be talking about roles and responsibilities of the product owner. Now, before we launch into this content, let me ask you to hang on at the end as long as you possibly can, because this is the month that we are kicking off the Webinar Plus. And so many of you got that email from Kim. And so Webinar Plus is where we're not only doing a video every month, but we're also giving you a handout so that you can work with your people. We've had so many people who have told us individually that they're working with some of their folks and they're watching the videos and things of this nature. And so what we wanted to do was support you in this. So every month you'll get a PDF along with that link. And so the link that Kim sent you, there's a PDF at the bottom of it. And so when you open it up, it's going to look like this. Let me just go ahead and pull mine up here and let you see what this looks like. And then we'll talk about it a little more later. And so what you're going to notice here is what you're going to notice. I can't tell if you see this or not. Can you see my my questions here? Give me a thumbs up. Dieter, I see you. You just give me a thumbs up. Can you see it? Okay, buddy. All right, so here's what we have here. You'll notice that you'll get this, it's webinar plus the notes. And so what happens here is that you've got points over on the left-hand side, 3 major points for the webinar for that month. And then you'll notice we've given you some questions to be able to talk to your people about if you're using this for development. And so what we're wanting to do is support you in that area, because those of you who are using this as development, we know we've got some friends out of Canada that are doing this. So if you're listening this morning, thank you so much for doing this. And I know we've got some folks at John Deere that are doing this. So thank you guys. And so what we want to do is just be able to support you with this. So every month, this is going to be coming out to you, and you have the rights to be able to duplicate this and to be able to hand it out to your people. And then you also have the capability of being able to, you'll have video there as well as you start looking at that. So let's get you up here and going. So anyway, that's so we're excited about that, or I'm excited about it, to try to help support some of the folks in these particular areas here. So anyway, get everything back up where I can see you. All right, so let's get started then. So today we're going to talk about roles and responsibilities of the product owner. Now, the product owner is an interesting role, because with all the different flavors of agile coming out, you'll start seeing people use the term product owner, but you'll notice that a lot of times they're using it maybe a little differently than you use it for Scrum. Product owner is historically, though, connected to the Scrum methodology, or the Scrum framework is really what they would call that. And so when you're looking at Scrum, at the product owner, you're normally talking about Scrum, but all these other flavors of agile, you're starting to see people use this same term for this person. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of flip-flop for you on a couple of these things to explain to you how Scrum talks about it, and then how some of the other people might use this particular role. Now, the whole goal in looking at agile and in Scrum in particular for your product, for your project, is that you're producing a product. That product is going to have certain types of features and functionality. And so when we talk about the product, that's really what we're talking about, is the features, the functionality that's going to be coming out of whatever it is that you're producing. And so products satisfy the want, the needs of the customer. And so the product owner is really the person who's the keeper of the features, the keeper of the user stories, the keeper of all of the components that the customer is really wanting. So to put it visually, and we'll show you some graphics here a little bit later, the product owner is connecting mainly to the customer. They should be the representative of that customer as we look at this. Then, of course, on the flip side of this, everything that's being done in this project should be bringing value to the customer. So that's the reason why people use Agile or Scrum or any of these other flavors to be able to deliver something to the customer rather than Waterfall, is they're trying to deliver something to that customer faster and allow them to get their hands on it and start playing with it earlier. And if you're wrong, you want to be wrong earlier rather than later, so that you have the capability of being able to adjust whatever it is. So value, though, comes through the eyes of the customer. And so the customer is looking at these features for their product or for their project, and they're looking at it with a certain amount of value. Value could be return on investment, it could be benefits, it could be ease of use, it could be any of these type of things. But what the customer is really doing is working with the product owner to be able to rank or refine those features so that the project team or that the development team, whatever you're calling that group, is working on the highest priority features at all time. And that creates a little bit of a challenge that we're talking about it. Now, we're going to talk about releases. I'll show you what I'm talking about with a release. But at the end of each sprint or iteration, you would be handing something off to that customer for them to start experimenting with those features and functionality. It's not perfect. It's not tested 100% in all areas in most cases, but they would have a few features to start trying out while you're working on the next sprint to hand them off another set of features. Now, every time you hand something off to the customer, this is not necessarily a release. That's one of the big challenges that people have. They assume because they're giving something to the customer, they'll call it a release. Most of the time, that's not true. Most of the time, you'll have multiple iterations and hand that off to the customer. And you might have 4 or 5 iterations, and that's release number 1. And then another 4 or 5, and that's release number 2. So it really determines on how you're interpreting some of those things. Now, one of the things about value, too, is this evidence-based management. I'm not sure if you've heard that term before, but it focuses on producing actions which support the value of the product. And so what's happening is we are doing things that's bringing value to the customer, and that's all we're doing. And so anything that's not bringing value through the eyes of the customer, we don't want to do, because that would be looked at as waste and wasted time. So that means that you would have to have metrics that are documenting it from the evidence-based or value-based, looking at it from the customer standpoint rather than from the team, or maybe even rather than from management. Now, obviously, the customer and management should be on the same page, obviously, with what they're doing. But the point is, those metrics should be measuring that level of commitment. Now, in researching this and getting ready for you guys, I ran across this, and I really like this graphic. And so I borrowed it from this author, and I want you to see this. So what is value in evidence-based management? Because evidence-based management, you're giving them something that's tangible for the customer to use. And so you'll notice they broke it down into 3 things here. And I thought this was really good. If you'll look at the green, the current value, you'll look at the time to market and ability to innovate. Now, because Agile and Scrum and all of your Agile methodologies are getting so focused on product development, then what happens is that there's different type of metrics they're looking at for speed to get a product out to the market. And of course, as we know, if you have a product, then that product, the one who gets out there first and fastest, is the one who dominates it for a while until somebody else trumps them with better features, okay? So if you look over on the current value side, they listed several things: revenue per employee, product cost ratio, employee satisfaction, customer satisfaction. They gave you current value. And a lot of times we are measuring all of these. But the problem is that our job market and our business market has changed. And so what we used to value is not exactly what we're valuing right now. So look at the time to market, which is another measurement that people are starting to do. Release frequency. How fast is that customer going to get these features? Release stabilization. Are the features we're using stable enough for us to even have a chance to test them and to be able to play with them a little bit to see how they feel, and are they working the way we thought they would work? Cycle time. How fast are we going to be able to start seeing? Are we going to be able in 4 weeks to be able to get some features out, or are we going to have longer iteration time because it takes longer to build the features that we do? And then on product index. And so in other words, all the products that we're putting together, all the products that we're moving together, are they supporting one another? And then look at the ability to innovate. Installed version index, a usage index, innovation rate, defects. Now, let's talk about innovation rate. Innovation rates, a lot of companies are trying to innovate their product. And so let me just give you a sample one. So if you have an iPhone, you know what I'm talking about. They're innovating that product with new features and functionality. And so they're always bringing out a new iPhone. And of course, the reason for that, they're trying to continue to maintain the dominance of the market. And your iPhone really is the dominant product on the phones. If you've noticed on your commercials, everybody measures everything according to the iPhone. That's because it's king in most cases. And then you can look at defects. How often on defects are these things messing up? Are we having to do the break fix stuff? Now, even in Agile, you'll find yourself having to do this quite often. But the point is that in value evidence and what is value and evidence-based management, you're looking at measuring different things than maybe you measured before, and you find yourself having to do this. Now, to lay the foundation for you on the product owner, this is a work process for the product owner. And so I want you to be able to see this. So first off, creating interviews. interview questions. Your product owner has some of the same characteristics that you'll notice your business analyst has to do sometimes with some of the components. You'll see some overlap between the two of those. If you don't have a business analyst, then you'll notice your product owner is doing some of those pieces. They're conducting an interview, obviously, with a customer. They're documenting user stories, features, story points. They're prioritizing the product backlog. They're creating the backlog or sprint backlog is what's going to be worked on for that one iteration or that one sprint. They're verifying that the customer prioritized features for the iteration of sprint. These are the most important. They're going to present the iteration backlog to the project team. The team estimates the backlog, not the product owner. So the team is the ones in charge of the estimate. And then you'll notice the iteration sprint begins. Monitoring the progress from the product owner will monitor the progress to see how they're doing. And then they'll also begin drafting other iterations to follow this based on the new priority of what those features are, how they've ranked from the customer. So this is a pretty straightforward product owner and the PO position that we're talking about here. However, many of you maybe have something that's a little bit of a different flavor, especially if you have people who are wearing double hats, where you've got somebody who's the product owner and the business analyst. I just wrote a one-day program talking about the different roles the business analyst could be, and one of them in Agile could be the product owner, and so it creates a little different challenge. The other thing that I want you to look at here is the types of roles in the project. So for an example, in Agile projects or Scrum projects, you'll notice that you've got your team. And so any of your team members are normally in almost any of the frameworks are going to be your worker bees. They're working to deliver what it is either the product owner wants or the project manager wants if they happen to be in waterfall. But the point is the worker bees. Then you'll have business representatives, which have a business focus. Now, these stakeholders might or might not attend your meetings with any regularity, but the point is they're giving you input for some of these things. Could be the customer right there. And then you've got your sponsor or your champion in some of your organizations. It could be the manager or the PMO, that's project management office director. And then of course you've got the real customer, the group or the person who funds the project. And of course that's who you're trying to connect with. Now you'll notice that the product owner role that we're talking about here, it could be connected to the customer. Obviously customer is going to be one of the main pieces because that's going to be the biggest piece, but that doesn't take it away from having to talk with some of these other people. Just like we do in waterfall, you find yourself having to interview different people, and sometimes you'll be sitting in a meeting and realize, okay, this is somebody we've never interviewed, but we need to be talking to them because they've got that splice of information that will benefit you and help you. So does a project automatically need a product owner? And so this is one of the challenges that comes into a lot of the hybrid situations that many of you guys are in, is the product owner role connects and supports the customer. So if the product owner, if you don't want to have a product owner, you're going to still have to have somebody who is connecting and representing that customer. Now, if you are using a BA, a business analyst, that business analyst will fit very well in this situation here. But if you're using a project manager situation, you've got to understand that the project manager is trying to run the project and trying to keep the project as efficient as possible. The product owner's main role is, are we getting the main product that the customer wants? So you've got a little different focus here. So the product owner gathers requirements from the customer, adjusts those requirements and features and story points, and prioritizes them for what the team is going to work on for the customer in the next iteration. So if you don't have a product owner position, somebody is going to still have to have that type of skills to be able to do this. So the product owner focuses on producing the product with features and functionality. So if you do it with a project manager, understand that those hats are really almost in competition sometimes when you're doing this. So the roles and responsibility of the product owner: define the product, manage the product backlog, that's your list of features, arrange the order of the features, the user stories, forecast what the customer requirements are going to be in the next iteration, represent the customer point of view in all the meetings, and monitor the progress of each iteration. So you see that if you're not going to use a product owner and you're going to use someone else, your business analyst is already doing a lot of these components. So it fits them a little bit better than it would a project manager or sometimes the team. Also, defining the product and the project vision. We've talked about this several months ago, but the customer's view is the driver of the Scrum or the Agile project. And so in other words, it starts with the scope, the way the customer sees it. And that scope is changing. That's the reason why they're using this, is that the scope is not set. It's a moving target, new priorities, different priorities. And so the customer is always able to make that adjustment. That's why you're doing Agile and Scrum. On the waterfall side, the scope is set. And so we set it in, we lock it in, and then we have change control to control that. And nothing wrong with either one of those. There's a place for both. But the vision supports the benefit for Agile, and the vision supports the benefit of the project as seen through the customer's eyes. And that customer is constantly trying to hit that moving target. And that's the reason why it benefits them so much greater here. So the product and project vision should remain stable, but the customer has the power to change if desired. And that's the reason why you plan for a sprint. And in doing that sprint, the product owner then plans for the next sprint. And then in doing that sprint, they plan for the next sprint. You don't see them planning 16 months down the road on what we're going to be working on. Why? Because the customer is constantly adjusting things and changing things in these areas. So your product vision supports the organization, business strategy, as well as strategic plan. And that makes sense. That would be true. And so each strategic plan would result in projects with the expectation to satisfy the outcomes presented in the strategic plan and business strategy. So even though you're doing an Agile project, that customer knows what their department goals are, what their agency goals are, what their strategic plan is going to be, and they would know whether or not this is aligning to support any of those goals. Just like on the waterfall side, you'll see that. So the product owner and sprint goals. Every sprint would have a goal, and so they are. It's the sprint goals are the job of the product owner and only the product owner. Now, occasionally you'll run into a situation where people will have a team as the product owner. That usually doesn't work the best if you're using that. You probably have noticed, because your team will get different ideas on what the goal is. So a product owner is usually looked at as a person. If you're going to have that person is the product owner. They're the ones representing the customer and the team. They're the ones ranking the backlog, the product backlog. They're the ones putting together the sprint backlog of what they want the team to work on next. And so they dictate the order, the priority of all work, and they can bring in others if desired, but this should not be, but the point is, it's not a team. So you're going to talk to the team. Of course you are. Your team are experts. So you're going to talk with them about stuff. They're going to say something takes longer than maybe you thought it would. Your subject matter experts, management, customer, quality. Of course, you're going to talk to all these different people, but the product owner is really the one who is in charge of the pecking order of how they're going to work on some of those things. And so this brings us to the term that many of you have been exposed to, the definition of done, DOD. DOD in the Agile world is really understanding what the scope is, but it's the broken down scope, the scope of the sprint, the scope of the features. And so definition of done depends on the project itself and what the customer is wanting to do, but it reinforces the completion of work from that sprint. And so we understand this would be the definition of done for this particular sprint or for this particular release. And we would talk about all of those in the various meetings. So it includes the scope of work, the ability to finish that scope within a time box. So a time box is going to be what we would call a sprint. So let's say it's a 4-week sprint. So that's a 4-week time box. That's all that means. Time box is whatever length of time we give something. If I ask you to research something for 1 week and you research it for that week, that was a 1-week time box. So time box is not a big problem. Okay. So definition of done includes common understanding from the Scrum Master, from the product owner, from the team, from the customer. Everybody understands this is the definition of done. Now, what feeds into this a lot of times is your minimum features. So in other words, this is the minimum amount of features that we would say is done for this to be able to have functionality for us. And so all of that discussion is happening from the team, from the product owner, from the customer. All of that is supporting each other with that. Now, the product owner in sprint planning. So we know that the product owner rearranges or refines the product backlog. They also will come up with what's known as a sprint backlog for that sprint. And so that sprint planning is really what they're talking about here. So it must support a major goal or objective for the project created by the product owner. The outputs for the sprint plan must be functional, and working, not a component that will work after 2 additional sprints. Now, this is a little difficult, and this is not being followed across the board with every flavor of Agile. The good thing about Agile is normally at the end of each sprint, you're handing something off to the customer. So that's a positive. You don't hand off half work. In other words, if I've only got if I've got 25 features we're supposed to hand off and we got 22 ready to go, those 22 go, those other 3 don't go because they're not finished, obviously. There's no measurement in the Agile world really for partial work. It's either finished or not finished. And so one of the things that they have really emphasized, almost all your authors in Agile and Sprint and in Scrum, has been that whatever you finish, try to finish it within 1 sprint. What work can we do for 1 sprint and get it to the customer? And that mindset throws us off a little bit, because sometimes you find those things that it requires a couple of sprints to get that piece done. And I understand in the real world it does that. But the purpose behind getting it broken down to the smallest element so that you can hand it off to the customer is, remember, in Agile and Scrum, execution is king. And so you're trying to execute something to that customer as fast as possible. And so this could include the product owner, the Scrum Master, the team. But the point is, you'd break it down as much as you could to get something working in that area to hand off to the customer. Even though in the real world, occasionally you'll find yourself having some feature carry over. And of course, a lot of times that's the reason why people will use the term epic, is it will carry over to a couple of sprints in order to put it, to build it, to put it all together. But in the Agile philosophy, they don't like that particular piece. So product owners create what they call sprint backlogs of features for completion in each sprint. All sprint planning must have agreement from the team that the level of work is realistic. So once again, let me say it again, that the product owner creates a sprint backlog, but the team does the estimate. So if the product owner creates so much work that you can't do it in a 4-week sprint, the team would push back and say, okay, we can only do half of this because you've got too much in here. So the team is in charge of estimation. The product owner is in charge of the ranking order of those. And so the product owner verbalizes to the team that they're hitting a moving target. No plan is perfect. All those things have to be there, obviously, and everybody understands that if they're on this team. But the point is that they are always working together. So the product owner cannot be a dictator that says, I need 30 features in 4 weeks. They can say, I need these 30 features, but then the team comes back and says, okay, we can't do 30 in 4 weeks. That's going to take us 9 weeks. So let's break half of it up in sprint 1, half of it up into sprint 2, and then let's see what we have. So that team has that power to be able to push back. So the focus of the product owner, if you look at it, is several different pieces. Now you see the strategic goals, department plan and release plan, iteration plan, daily stand-up. So you notice how all of these are lining up together. They have to in order to build the support. But the product owner is really only dealing with the lower 3. They're dealing with a release plan, which is going to be going to the customer in so many releases. They're going to have iteration plans, which support that release plan. And then the daily stand-up meetings, which are going to be 15-minute meetings that are going to be done by the team every morning, where they talk about what they did yesterday, what they're doing today, and were there any problems or impediments that caused them any kind of problem as they were doing this. So these different types of plans are going to be plans that the product owner is constantly dealing with. The daily stand-up meetings, the iteration plans, the release plans, all of those are going to be coming up. So let's talk about the stand-up for a moment. The stand-up, the challenge that you have with stand-ups, and many of you probably have verbalized this in class, is trying to keep these things from going over 15 minutes, because you talk about what you did yesterday, what you're doing today, and or were there any problems? And it's when you get to the problems that it gets difficult to keep people from sucking down too much time, because everybody's going to tell you blow by blow. There we were, they're going to tell you everything. Okay. So the daily stand-up meeting, you really have to watch it to keep it at 15 minutes. And if there is something, and there will be something that you want to take offline to talk about how to fix a problem or how to deal with a person, take that all out of the daily stand-up. You don't want an hour meeting every morning for your people sucked down in attending this. And so those organizations that have experienced that, and many of them did away with the daily stand-up because they felt like that it wasn't productive because it was sucking down an hour, and rightly so. So this needs to be 15 minutes, same time, every day, boom. We get in, we talk, we move on out. It builds a daily accountability. And so your product owners can attend the daily stand-up, but they don't necessarily have to attend, but they can attend. Your Scrum Master will many times be part of this. They'll facilitate it a lot of times. Any facilitation kind of goes to the Scrum Master. But the product owner who attends the daily stand-up, their focus is on requirements, not solving problems for everybody or anything like that. It's only going to be on requirements. Next is going to move into that iteration plan that we're talking about. So this is for one sprint or one iteration. And so this product owner has put the package together of what they want done in that sprint, okay? But the team's going to estimate it, and the team is going to give feedback as you do this. So this team sets the duration, the product owner selects the order or priority. And so let's say there's too many features in there for the amount of time. So it's a 4-week sprint, but the product owner has too much. Then the team gives feedback, but the product owner is really the one who has the power to pull features out of that iteration plan and put it back into the backlog and then decide when they're going to move this into the next. And so there's going to be that collaboration that's happening there. And so your product owner will find themselves drafting the next several iterations as they're going through. And so, but it's not locked in. So it's not a draft that everybody and his dead dog is signing off on. It's not that formal. They've just drafted that in these next 3 iterations, here's what they think it's going to take. And so if the team finishes earlier or the customer changes their mind, then they're constantly reshuffling them until they actually hand it off to the team. And then when they hand it off to the team, now it's actually that work a work plan for them to be able to finish and for them to be able to work on. So planning and the product owner is going to fit very much like this. You've got your product vision, you've got any missed features or corrections that they decide to put together, and you've got your current features, and all those come together to come up with an iteration plan for that iteration, for that team to work on at that particular piece. And so all of those are feeding together for that. Now, your product owners and the release plan. Remember, I mentioned earlier that on your release plan is not at the end of every sprint. You might have 4 or 5 handoffs from the sprint before you actually have a release. And so release plans focus normally on multiple iterations for the customer and multiple features that you're handing, because many times it takes multiple features before it kind of packages it together as one main deliverable. And so release planning could include the product owner, the team, the sponsor, because all of those parties are very much part of this. And so that release plan is going to be something that's going to be much larger than what we're talking about with sprints, because it's going to be several sprints that are complete in order for you to have release number 1. So planning and the release. So it looks something like this. So if we completed, let's say 30 features for iteration 1, 40 for iteration 2, and 25 for iteration 3, and all 3 of those packaged together gave us release number 1. And so many times that might even be a deliverable that we have. And so if you were using a vendor, that vendor maybe would be paid for release number 1 because it would be a deliverable. Now, I did not use the deliverable term. I didn't want to take us in another direction, but I'm just trying to logically help you think through the logic of this. So you had 3 different iterations that delivered these features, and that was release number 1. And then you would go back. Now we're going to release number 2, but we'll have multiple iterations that will feed into that area too. So product owners can begin forecasting the end date of the project. One of the things that continues to come up, it came up just last week in a class, is that developers and people working on Agile and Scrum continue to say they can't give a due date. That's a bunch of phooey. We can't get by with that. Management's never going to let us get by with that. That's crazy. So we can come up with it, but it's not something that is hard and fast. You have to make projections. And so running 3 iterations, if you almost any of the material that you look at today will come back to this same thing, that if you will run 3 iterations and then that produces an average number of story points or user stories or features that you're doing, you will then be able to start giving management at least a range of when you think something will happen. And management's got to have something. They can't just be told, well, we don't know when, we're doing agile. We don't know, we don't have an idea when it's going to be done because we're doing Scrum. Nobody's going to live with that. So give the projection. And management understands that it's a projection as well. The truth is, all of our project due dates are projections. And, we don't know what's going to happen that's going to throw any of them off. But run 3 iterations, and then it produces that average, and then take that average to start projecting out when you think those releases will all be finished. And you and the team will be able to figure that out pretty quickly. All right, so let's talk about the backlog. One of the main responsibilities of the product owner position is managing the backlog, which is the master list of all the features and functionality. So they called it grooming, and now it has been changed to refining. And so backlog items are ranked to bring benefits to the customer. And so who does this? The product owner. How do they do it? They're in connection with that customer. So whatever the customer is wanting as the most important, that's what you're trying to get to that customer, get finished and get to that customer the quickest. So the team's not in charge of determining which items come next. Now, let me talk about this for a moment. That doesn't mean that a good product owner is not going to listen to the team, because they're experts in this area. And so it's possible that you've got a product owner who doing a great job as a product owner, but is maybe not as deep technically, if it's a technical project, as your development team. So obviously you're working together, and the team's having to explain that we've got to build to get this feature to work. Here's what we've got to build. Well, of course you're going to work together and listen to them, but it's the product owner's responsibility to be able to pull all that together. And so of course there's going to be collaborations, and the product owner and customers would align align the correct priority. And so in other words, that customer would be talking to the product owner. The product owner's in the team with everyone, talking to the team for clarity on all of these. So the product owner keeps the product backlog up to date, creates an order of how the features fit together, their dependencies. They optimize the sequence of the product backlog for efficiency. They examine the constraints, how they impact implementation. So that's their position. And the team obviously is going to influence that as well. Next, they're arranging the features, the user stories, or the story points. Now, these are the most common things that the features are called in the product backlog. And so features, make you understand what that is. User stories, if you're doing technology, it's how people interact with the technology. And so many of you that are using technology, you probably do and use user stories. And then the third ranking of these would be called story points. Story point is kind of an interesting deal, because it's not really anything. You and your team decide what a story point is. How many story points equal an hour of work? And so, and people will say, why didn't we just use hours of work? You could use hours of work. But anyway, you'll see this a lot in the development field, where people will come up with story points. But once you understand what an hour's worth of work is worth in story points, you're able to make whatever projection you need to. But the product owner has to balance that ranking with this. And so they're constantly re-ranking the features based on what the customer needs, or the changes that need to be there. And so that allows them then to start forecasting what and when some of these things are going to be done. So the product owner is the main person discussing the features with the customer, and this interaction has to be strong. It has to be instantaneous in some cases, and they can and should draft the iteration backlog. And so they are the person who's saying, here's what we need to have in the next iteration, or even in the next 2 iterations. They might even be 2 or 3 out, but those are not locked in until they hand it off. And so the iteration backlogs are not locked in until it's given to the team for delivery, and then it's locked in, and there's not going to be, or shouldn't be, a lot of changes once they've been given that 4-week that iteration plan. Now let's look at the product owner and communication. So we start off here where we define the product vision, and then you'll notice that they anticipate the customer's needs, because they already know the vision. And then what you're going to notice is that they're going to prioritize the product backlog and start interacting with the developers. And this is that camaraderie, this is that cooperation we're talking about. And then you'll notice they'll evaluate progress and workloads as it starts going along. And then of course they will be planning for future iterations based on this knowledge. So your first one is going to be probably one of your biggest and most clumsy iterations because you know the least maybe about your workers or about the project. But after you've run 2 or 3 of these, and that's the reason why most people are saying after you've run 3, you're starting to pick up an idea because you understand what's happening in these iterations and how much work they can and cannot do. So this requires feedback from the product owner to the customer, because that's going to be one of the terms too. And many times we leave this out, but that customer needs to hear from the product owner what's going on. So feedback to the customer comes as the team hands off new features at the end of a sprint and over time completes a release. The product owner informs the customer of the release frequency based on the velocity, and that's the average is really what velocity is, the velocity of the completed features over time. And understanding the velocity of releases connects to the team, the time to market, which focuses on continuous delivery. Because remember, the idea is they're getting continuous delivery every few weeks, and they're able to have something tangible that they're going to be able to start using. So they represent the customer's viewpoint. So that's what the product owner is supposed to be doing. So waterfall represents the command and control system. And of course, the reason why we use waterfall is because we lock the scope in and nothing changes without going through change control. So it's a command and control system. Product owners are the main mouthpiece of the customer. So you can see why that product owner and that customer have to be on the same page. Man, if you get a product owner who's misunderstanding the customer, this is going to be a mess because they're verbalizing something that the customer is not wanting, and so it'll be something different. And then of course they monitor the progress. Now they're not monitoring it like a project manager because they don't have authority over the team. The team is accountable for themselves, but they focus on speed. They're looking, they don't have power over the team for the features, but they are focusing on what kind of speed is happening and are they continuing to have some problems with what they're doing. So if the team is consistently providing 22 of the 25 features in an iteration, then the product owner would reduce the feature expectation down to 22. The reason for that is because there's no value in those 2 or 3 features that's not being produced. And so you'd reduce it down to 22. That's what we can seemingly can do in that length of time. And so that's what you do is start producing that. Now there's some negative behaviors that happen sometimes with the product owner. Expect each sprint to successfully implement the feature or user stories every time. You're going to have hiccups even in Agile. And so I don't care what you do, you're going to have some hiccups just like you do in waterfall. So there is no silver bullet here, folks. That's why we're all on medication, okay? So there is no silver bullet here. You're going to have hiccups. What you thought was going to take 10 hours takes 20. Or something happens, or somebody leaves. I mean, it's the same experiences that you guys have all the time. So it does not clearly define the requirements or features. They maybe didn't do a good enough job of this, and so you don't know what you don't know sometimes until you get in the middle of it. They could leave the team out of discussions. You see this happen a lot of times where the product owner is functioning like a lone ranger, and that's not what you're wanting to have happen. Limited monitoring, slow in returning calls, responding to the team. Now, if the product owner is doing what they're supposed to do, they're going to be real close to the team. They have access to the team. Or they fail to guarantee each sprint deliverable delivers value to the customer. See, the team's not talking to the customer, the product owner is. So if the product owner is not hitting on all cylinders, then the team's going to be off as well. They could attempt to micromanage, and we have had people talk about this, trying to control or micromanage the team. That's not their role. Also dictate duration estimates. We've seen that. Refuse to formally prioritize the features and create a sprint backlog. They just wanted to work from the big pot of features, which was the product backlog, and not give the team the priorities of what should be the next sprint and the next sprint and so forth. They request changes in the middle of a sprint. That should be a no-no in most cases, because that team needs to be able to run wide open, giving all those features out the door from that sprint. They could refuse to use Scrum tools and techniques for stakeholders, and that would be estimating, communication, facilitation, any of those kind of things. They struggle with translating the product vision into the features. And so you can see this is a major distraction here for the product owner. They don't have the power, or they don't have the knowledge to be able to break it down so they can hand it off to the team. Or they interfere too much with the team. You want that team working wide open. So give them space to work. You've hired good people. You've trained those people. So let them run wide open in what you're wanting them to do. Now, refinement. This is the reorganizing of the product backlog. So stakeholders have heard the term regrooming. Regrooming is not the term today. They've changed it to refinement. And so many of your books, when you're reading, it talks about grooming and regrooming, same thing, refinement. But that's just an old term. And so the major job of the product owner of their work is on refining the product backlog, constantly keeping it from the highest priority to the lowest. And so that way the customer is always getting the highest priority work done and handed off to them at all times. So refinement is something they would continuously do based on every visit with their customer. The team, neither the team nor stakeholders are in charge of refining the backlog. So you're legitimately taking what the product owner hands you to work on for the next sprint and working on that. So if we did not produce what we were supposed to produce in that sprint, it's the product owner's fault for giving us those features to work on. And so as long as we produce the features we were given, we've done our job. The product owner should have done a better job in giving us the right features. So refinement is not done by the team, even though I'm hearing a lot of people talk about this. It's not done by the team because there should be the one person representing that customer as they do that. Creating the product roadmap. A product roadmap communicates the strategic plan, goals, and outcomes set up by the customer. And so the product owner normally creates the product roadmap. And so it includes the vision, project priorities, the plan, the goals, anything like that. Work which matters the most for the customer so that they're already setting the expectations on the priorities, and then specific metrics or requirements which are must-haves for the customer to be, for the project to be complete. So some of this roadmap is going to be that higher level document that they're creating and making and communicating to the team. So the team is not just working in a vacuum. They've heard what the overarching goals are here. So let me give you an example of, expand this just a little bit. You maybe have not heard these a whole lot, but I want to go ahead and include these this morning. Types of roadmaps. One would be a portfolio roadmap connected to strategic goals, return on investment. Portfolios have large sums of investment, so they complete a variety of product goals. Next is a strategy roadmap. Focuses on the strategic goals and objectives for the products, which products are created, expanded, reworked for more functionality. Epics, you've heard of those. A series of features that take more than a sprint to produce, and that's what we were referring to earlier. Takes, it might take several sprints to produce every piece of that piece of functionality. The release roadmap displays high-level activities and when the various product releases will happen. This high-level planning document gives a macro view of the features and functionality, but remember, even though you have a release roadmap, that's not locked in. That's all still very fluid until the project finishes. And then you have your feature roadmap, which shows which features are completed at the end of the current sprint. Features are consistent. Features are broken into components for working functionality per sprint. But once again, the features are not locked in until they're handed off for that particular sprint or iteration. So all of these are still very fluid. All right, so creating the different plans, the product owner would begin with the goals, objectives, priorities set by the customer or customer group, but the product owner should be one person. And so they break it down into the following, such as the goal includes benefits it's going to bring the customer, the features, which are the behaviors required to meet the goal of the product, the metric, it shows how to measure this product feature. The cost was the expected cost for the completion, and then the duration. What's the expected duration to complete this feature? So you can see that some of the things that they're putting together here, that's why they have the collaboration with the team, because the team is going to have to give them some of this information. And then we look at this validation. Validation includes actions such as alignment for the product feature with the product strategy detailed by the customer. Customers can forget about the overarching strategy and they start focusing on nitpicking little b features. So the product owner should ask the hard question when a feature seems beyond the product strategy or the goal. And so that means that if the customer is asking for this feature and it doesn't seem to fit what we've already talked to them about, we ought to be able to give them ask questions and find out from them why or how does this feature fit these goals and objectives they've already given us. Now, some of the validation tools that are used in the agile side is going to include survey, can be customized to the group, upper management, PMO. interviews with end users on what they need or want. Product owners can function also as a business analyst when there's a discrepancy in the desired feature. Competitor analysis, how have competitors structured or implemented features in similar projects? Now, when they're talking about competitor analysis, this is where it's connecting to a product, because once again, you're looking at competitors. Competition is out here getting ready to produce a product that's very similar to this. And then conduct usability tests. Just because a product has features does not mean that the user has prioritized it as a top priority. So that's why the product owner is trying to always have the top priorities worked on. You also have inspecting and adapting. Inspecting focuses on functionality and quality, which is part of all types of projects. Adapting focuses on adjusting the current sprint plan by adding new work or moving incomplete work to another sprint for completion. And so the product owner inspects and adapts the project. And so this is part of that monitoring that we were talking about. So they monitor the progress for quality and adjust the sprints to fix or redo areas that ends up coming out not as higher quality as what they think that it should be. Engaging the stakeholders for validation. Microsoft said, and I want to give you this quote because I thought it was interesting. They say 80% of the time project teams are wrong about what the customer wants. Because teams misunderstand the customer, it is essential for product owners to validate the outcome from the team with sprint demos or sprint reviews. Validation is not telling the customer about the product's functionality. It shows the customer how it functions. Validation guarantees the team is providing MVP. And so it's minimum viable product is what MVP stands for. And so that's the minimum amount of features is what they're referring to. I thought that was a great quote. So the product owner and complexity. When refining the features, the product owner must determine the difficulty of the requirement. And so I borrowed this graphic and showed you where I borrowed this because I thought it was really good. What's more complicated, what's easier, and you're balancing that all the time in the amount of features. Just the number of features is not enough. What's the complexity of being able to develop those features? Because some features are just going to take longer, and then some you don't even know how hard they are. And so you're looking at being able to balance the difficulty with that. Product owner also engaging in validation with a minimum viable product to help expand the understanding. One can use KANO. KANO model is something that's been used a lot in product development on the marketing side. So many of you maybe have seen it over on that side. But what you'll notice here with all of the arrows that they've drawn here, you'll notice that the green arrow on the lower side, it shows basic needs. And of course, what happens, that would be like your minimum amount of features. And then you'll notice that the red looking arrow at the top shows delighters. The delighters are going to be those features that are on the cutting edge that the customer is just ecstatic about. So what you're trying to do though, is in many cases, just provide those particular features to where you're getting as high as you possibly can to the delighters that the customer wants. But there's going to be those basic needs or those basic features that the customer has to have in order for them to think this is going to be functional for them. So when you look at KANO, it breaks the product requirements down into at least three categories, sometimes more: basic, performance, or excitement. And the excitement would be the ecstatic thing that it allows it to do. So basic would be essential features. And these features, if they're missing, they would be looked at as it brings no value to the customer. These would be bare bones, has to have these basic features. In performance, this is going to be middle of the road for it. And so it features which are not standard in a product, they increase the satisfaction. Customers are more than satisfied with this product because it has these additional features. And so this is kind of the middle of the road piece, but it's above the basic minimum viable product. And then of course, excitement, that's got features that just are the customer is ecstatic about. And so they have a lot of features. And so this creates word of mouth advertising. They tell people about it. They're ecstatic about it. And so they're verbalizing this to other individuals. All right. So let me stop for just a moment, answer any questions, and then I want to talk to you just a little bit about what's happening towards the end of the year in the next couple of slides here. So let me open this up where I can see some of you folks. So what questions do you have about what we've talked about this morning? Any questions from anyone? Okay, let me go into tell you a little bit about what's happening. All right, so I introduced you to Web Plus, the notes, and so it's a new service for those of you who signed in just a little late. This is our first month for Webinar Plus, and so it's Webinar Plus is a new service. It includes both the monthly webinar, just like you're looking at here, and an outline with questions for your staff. We put that together for the sole purpose of being able to expand and support some of the people who are using this for some of their monthly training as they do this. Second thing we want to do is it doesn't cost you anything. It's totally free to anyone. You're able to print the outline off and the questions and talk to your people. The video, you get a link to it, and if you ever need to go back to a different video, if you go to our website, Kim has placed them on the website, and so past webinars will be there. And so from this point on, you'll see a webinar, and then you'll see the PDF with it as well. So you'll have access to every one of these if you decide you need to go back to it. So all that's going to be on our website as you do that. Then the next piece would be two items. These two items will be sent to you every month. So you'll get a monthly video link, plus you'll get the PDF for those who get the link and who aren't here live like you guys are. We have several who watch the video afterwards. So over the next several weeks, the timing just doesn't work for them that day. And so if you sign up for a video every month, just like you do, but you're not able to be here, as long as you signed up, you'll get a link from Kim and you'll get the PDF from Kim. So you don't have to feel like you've got to be here at 10 o'clock Central Time in order to be able to do this. Here's our next seminar that we're going to be talking about next month. We're going to talk about the roles and responsibilities of the Scrum Master. And so we'll break that apart. That's going to be on the 9th, Friday, the September 9th at 10 a.m. Central Time. And then in October, we have transitioning from waterfall to Scrum. That's going to be our webinar in October. And so that's October 14th at 10 o'clock. So we're going to talk about the transitioning. That's a challenge for many organizations who's done everything in waterfall all that time. And then for mastermind groups, many of you have sent some people to these. We've had tons of people this year be part of this, but if you're not familiar with it, this is our PMP mastermind group. It's free. It's a 5-day service, and so people participate about an hour a day whenever they work it in. And so our last one for the year, we do 4 of these a year, and the purpose for a mastermind group is to help people get their material organized for their application, understand what they're looking at, and understand what they're going to be accountable for when they do a boot camp. And so that's what it is. So we've put this together. They watch a video every day. They have an action that they have to take care of. It's about 45 minutes a day for 5 days. So they get 5 contact hours for it. Plus we give a free giveaway. So of all the people in our mastermind group, we'll do a drawing, and that drawing then gives somebody a free boot camp. And so our last mastermind group is going to be September 12th through 16. And so then we'll put out our dates out for 2023. But anyway, that's what that is. And so if you have someone who's wanting to be part of a mastermind group to help kind of organize their material so that they're ready to take the PMP, and plus we give them a 25-question test, so they have the exposure to what some of the test questions would feel like. So all of that happens at that point for September 12th through 16. So about 45 minutes a day for 5 days. Our last 2 boot camps are going to be October 24 through 27 and December 5 through 8. And so these are virtual PMP exams. This is with the new material. We understand that the material is adjusting again at the end of this month. And so that will include the new material on it as well. And so for those of you who don't know this, PMI, now when you do a boot camp, you use their material. And so we are an ATP where we purchase the material directly from them. And so the passing rates have been phenomenal in taking the PMP. So if you have been nervous about it in the past, don't hesitate to do this. This is a good time to take it. So we have 2 more left for at the end of this year. And so let me look here. I've got a question that popped up. So how do you replace a product owner? That's a great question. Normally the product owner has been assigned by management or has been picked by the customer. And so if you've got a product owner who doesn't know what they're doing, then that would be one of the things that you would have to do, is to go back to whatever your system is for being able to deal with this. And so whether it's talking to the customer or talking to management for the replacement of that person. And so normally it's going to be not just that you've got a bad product owner. But if they're not ranking, they're not doing their job, they're not handing off the proper people, the proper features for the people to work on in the next sprint, then obviously those are going to be some major problems. So, and they've got to be collaborating with some of that. But I would just go back to my normal system of who's the sponsor or the champion for that project that you would normally be talking with. And so that would be the part I would look at. Sometimes it's difficult though to get rid of a product owner because they've been handpicked by the customer. So that's sometimes very difficult. Other questions by anybody?
Hi, Dr. Mathis. I had a question, and it's kind of unrelated, but I just wanted to get your advice. So, I'm in the process of ordering the Pim book, sorry. But I've had mixed reviews. Some people telling me that the newest edition, I think it's the 7th edition, is has less material. And a lot of people are giving me advice to buy the 6th edition, and I just wanted to get your advice. I mean, what do you recommend?
Well, what do you want to do with the PMBOK?
I wanted to, study, see what type of material, or is it material that can help me for the PMP?
The PMBOK's not even
Okay.
used in the PMP any longer. It's used as one resource of many. So it's not like it was when a bunch of us all went through it and you had to literally know almost every, you felt like you had to know every word for the PMP. So that
Right.
you don't need it for the PMP. The material that you get from PMI, that material is all you need. You don't need another book. And so,
Okay.
so it streamlines it. But let's talk about the question. This is the PMBOK 7.
Hmm.
It's about half the size of the PMBOK 6. It's not structured like it at all. And that's the reason why you'll get mixed reviews. This is more of like a handbook. And so what happens is that you would look stuff up. It would give you some general ideas and direction on all the various aspects of a project, but it's not giving you the very specific inputs and outputs and tools and all those things like PMBOK 6 did. So if I was writing a best practice for our organization or something like that, I probably would want the PMBOK 6 because it's going to tell me literally every minute thing. And I would decide whether I wanted that tool in there or not for our company. But if I'm using it for just a reference book, like many project managers do to just kind of jumpstart their thinking on something, this would be the one I would use. So it really kind of depends on what you're wanting to do. The PMBOK, I still have both. I've got my PMBOK 6 setting right here with me too.
Okay.
But it depends on what you need. So if you need that minute, literally naming every tool for something, then you're going to want the PMBOK 6 because 7 won't do it. But the handbook to give you the broader scope of what we need to do here or some broader ideas, then the PMBOK 7 it is half the size, and so
Right.
PMBOK 7 would be okay for that.
Okay. Thank you for the advice. That's exactly what I've been hearing. So I just wanted to, get your advice, but thank you.
But you don't need either one of them for the PMP
Right.
test. The material they give you, it's a big white book. You will just live in that white book for the actual test.
Okay.
Okay, so is it acceptable for product managers, analysts to change, modify the requirements frequently at the end of the sprint? Okay, so I'll tell you the general rules for this. And so the general rule is that when you give somebody the features to work on in a sprint, you don't normally allow changes. And there's always exceptions. You guys know what I'm talking about. But in general, you don't, because you want your team executing, not caught up in all the changes and the adjustments. So generally, you don't want to change. In other words, they've got the customer and the product owner have to be committed for those 4 weeks that this is the scope of work for that sprint, and then we deliver that. Now, they can make adjustments in the next sprint that has some reference to that, and that would be looked at as acceptable. But if you're having a bunch of things happen where people are stopping a sprint to have change orders in a sprint, not that it could never happen, you know what I'm saying. Everybody has exceptions, but in general, it should not be happening. Also, I took and passed the PMP exam in May. I'd be glad to talk with you about the test. Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate it so much. So, but anyway, any other questions? Thank you guys for the endorsements on the boot camp. Any other questions about product owner? All right. Well, look, it's good to see all you folks on here with us. And next month, we'll be talking about the Scrum Master a little bit. And so the roles and responsibility of the Scrum Master. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend and that you're able to stay cool. And so I hope this was beneficial to you. And like I said, you'll get the link for this video as soon as it gets processed here. And you'll get the PDF that you can hand out to your people if you're using it like that. And so I wish you guys well. And so thank you so much for being part of it. And I'll see you guys next month. Okay. Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.